All right. I'm here with Manuel Pasquale from Montreal. Manuel, introduce yourself. Who are you? You're interested in foreign policy and military interventionism. What got you interested in that?
But first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm really happy to have this discussion with you. I've been a member of your party since a few years. I was not always a libertarian. I used to be a Marxist 10 years ago before I had, by curiosity, the opportunity to listen to Stefan Molyneux's podcast.
Nice.
Okay, so my name is Manuel. I live in the suburbs of Montreal. I was born here in Quebec. French is my first language, so as a disclaimer, sorry, I have a terrible accent. Even if when I listen to myself, I usually don't like my French accent in English. I work full time in aircraft maintenance, but it's really not my passion. It's an easy job. I'm really more passionate about history and philosophy,
Hmm.
and I have studied a lot the histories of wars, and there's a lot of lies about them. So
Right.
I'm really passionate about that.
All right. Well, let's get right into it then.
May
What
I
is
do just an important disclaimer,
Sure.
because every time we talk about wars, usually when you oppose a war, many people will react and saying, "Oh, so you support the person against who the war is made." For example, you know, if I was against the war in Iraq in 2003, it's not because I'm a fan of Saddam Hussein. And the most important thing is that I'm not a Nazi supporter, because we will talk about World War II, and being against World War II doesn't mean that we like the Nazi or that we sympathize or support them. It's important to say it because a lot of people will call us that way.
Right, right. Okay. So you don't you're not a Nazi, you're not an Islamist terrorist
I'm
apologist.
a,
You
I'm a
are
libertarian. I'm an
right.
anarchist. In fact, I believe in the non-aggression principle and property rights. And I don't know everything, so I say I could. Most of the facts I believe them in good faith. I tend to believe historians that are mostly libertarian, even if I also read historians that can be sometimes leftist, or even there's a lot in the revisionist movement. There's a lot of historians that are, let's say it, that are Nazi. I will also read them, but I prefer always to refer myself to libertarian or libertarian historian. And at the end, I will give a few references of book, especially from the Mises Institute, to which I refer myself.
Sure. All right. Well, let's get right into it. What is the libertarian? What should be the libertarian stance on war and military action? I mean, obviously, we need force to protect ourselves, to
Absolutely.
protect our nation. What's wrong, or where do we draw the line? When is force necessary? When is it preferable? When is it not good?
But first of all, I think we will use the principle of a minimal state here,
Right.
as with the role of protecting its citizens, property, and contracts. So I think that a war could be legitimized if you're attacked without any provocation. If you just if I just take Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked the United States, but the United States had put on them an oil embargoes. Japan is a small island; they had no colonies. They're probably not self-sufficient in food. So if you put on them an oil embargoes, and they attack you, of course it's evil. It was evil for the Imperial Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor, but it's not like the United States were not all that innocence. They had
Right.
they had memorandum in their State Department, suggestion how they could provoke Japan to strike first. So
Right.
so yes, if
Yes.
an unprovoked attack, which I think in a close to ideal libertarian world would probably almost never happen, but it
Right.
could happen. So yes,
Would Canada or the United States be justified in launching an attack on a country that embargoed them?
That's a good question. We should. I think war should always be the last solution. If the
Right.
embargo can threaten the survival of the nation, because I don't think that it's the role of the government to put embargoes.
Right.
So if the survival of the people could be threatened, I think there could be a discussion. I think that I always say that when you speculate about war and you're not sure, it's always better to not intervene, because
Right.
going into wars, as we will as we will talk about it, has huge unintended consequence.
Right. Yeah. The way I try to bring it down to the individual level and think, okay,
Yes.
when am I justified in using force? Right. So if someone embargoes me from going to a grocery store, in other words, a big guy standing there pushing me away and saying I can't go into the grocery store to get my food, well, obviously I'm justified in defending myself and defending my right to go into that grocery store, and so I can take him out. I can use escalating force until he's out of my way. But what I probably can't do is go to his house and like kill his family or something like that, or attack. Right. So I would focus on, maybe if I bring that to the military sense, there are going to be ships, or there are going to be someone that is physically stopping that trade. Well, okay, if we can't use diplomacy, and if we can't use any other thing, eventually you're justified in using force against those individuals and those specific assets. I would say that. But it's also, I like the common law principle of as much force as is necessary, right? But no more. So how much force is necessary? Well, do we need to nuke the entire country and kill all the innocent civilians to stop that embargo? Probably not. We could probably take out a few assets. We could probably flex our muscles and say, listen, we're not going to stand up for this embargo. And once they back off, okay, we're good. Now we're back to trading again, or something like that, right?
If we take again just the example of Japan in 1941, the United States put an oil embargo on Japan because Japan was having an aggressive foreign policy in China, which we could understand. The hypocrisy there is that the United States didn't put an oil embargoes on the British Empire or the Dutch Empire, who was also having an empire at the same time. And it's not like you said, Japan was a small island, which was probably not self-sufficient in food. They were industrialized and they had no oil. Putting on them an oil embargo would not be the same as Japan would have said to the US, hey, I'm not selling you any more rice to make sushi. It's not like it would have starved the United States. It's okay, we still can eat potatoes or bread,
Right. Now, was that oil embargo on Japan just with regards to U.S. oil, or was it with regards to all oil?
I don't know, but at the time, I think Japan, the way Japan was receiving its oil, I think mostly from the United States. I know that after they attacked one of the islands in the Pacific, that was owned by the Dutch at the time. I don't know if it's Indonesia or another big island in the Far East Asia. I think they could get oil there.
Right.
But obviously they didn't have oil, because even at the end of the war, they had probably hundreds of fighter airplanes, and they could not take off to fight bombers because they simply had no oil. So.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, that wasn't just an attack on the Japanese people, that embargo. It was also an attack on American oil producers and
but
those,
I could be open
the American.
to the idea that even in a libertarian world, What do you do if you're the libertarian minimal small state government, and an oil producer or an arm manufacturer is selling oil and weapon to someone that is really doing evil stuff?
Yeah.
I think there could be a gray zone where we could ask, yeah, are you, when you know that person is doing all that evil stuff, continuing to feed him, is it really moral? I think there could be a question
Right.
there.
Well, one of our platform planks this election was to prohibit arms sale to Saudi Arabia. So we're there's a Canadian company selling arms to Saudi Arabia. We know those arms are being used aggressively against the Yemenis and other people. They're being used to kill people. They're being used to commit crimes, in other words. And so if you knowingly sell a weapon to a criminal enterprise, that ought to be prohibited. I think you can make a good case for that. Again, it's a little bit different if you're selling arms to someone you don't know that they're going to commit a crime. But in this case, in advance, they're going to use these guns to kill people, to commit crime, to commit murder, to commit thievery, and to steal property. And you can make a good case that ought to be prohibited.
Again, if we would be in an ideal libertarian world, like in Canada and the US, and the only problem would be that one of the Canadian or US manufacturer is selling arms to Saudi Arabia, I think if that would be the only problem we would have, let's say we have no central bank, no other wars, and I think it would be still a better situation than what we have today.
Right. Okay, so what I'm gathering from you is, from your perspective, we ought to use force only protectively.
Yeah.
We should not initiate. We shouldn't go looking for war. We shouldn't be doing all these interventions overseas. So what do you make of the last decade or 2 decades of Middle East intervention?
But first, I want to say, just to finish with my main arguments against wars are from is that wars basically are big violation of the libertarian principles. Usually with war, you're going to have tax, inflation, public debt, central planning, which is how communist regime used to work. And you're going to have censorship, which prevent people from criticizing the war. And one of the worst, I think, is conscription, especially during World War I and World War II. And of course, you have the collateral damage. Basically, that's, if you support any of that, it's anti-libertarian. So, of course, the recent decades of wars, as you asked me, in the Middle East, there was no conscription. We could, because of the internet, we could finally criticize the war, which was not the case, I think, during the First World War. There was no internet. And I think during the First World War, people went to jail for just being against the war. So, so of course, I think that those wars in the Middle East were not justified in many ways. Because I see wars as wars are government's programs, and those wars are always targeting problems that are caused by governments, which is a nonsense. It's like I said, governments don't protect us. It's like if you were paying a security agency to protect you, but instead they send thieves and thugs stealing and beating you. It's just the current government protection doesn't work. If you talk about the wars in the Middle East, like Saddam Hussein was helped and maintained by the U.S. government during many years. He was supported against Iran. When he committed war crimes, I think it was with the permission and with the help of the United States. If we talk about Afghanistan or Bin Laden, I think Bin Laden had already been helped by the CIA when he was fighting against the Soviet in the 1980s. So look, are we going to give power to the government to go to war when it's the same people that caused the problem? We could do the same thing for the previous war, like World War II. World War II happened because Western government went to war in the First World War. That was obviously the First World War is probably the event that started really the big government thing and all the problems we have today.
Right.
Because even the tiny government that we had in 1914 were not able to prevent the imperialism that led to the First World War. But
the First World War, I look at as a start. We had a temporary income tax put in place in Canada that stuck around. We had the formation shortly thereafter of the central banking. Of course, the U.S. Started its central bank, shortly after to pay for that war. And so we've had a century of income tax. We've had a century of central banking now, and it's no coincidence that's also coincided with a century of total warfare. There's been nonstop military action ever since then. But let's go back to World War I, because if we're looking at that as the catalyzing event, the event that kind of kicked this all off, what was the justification? What was the devil's advocate position to your position? You're saying we shouldn't have been in World War I, but what were the propagandists and everyone saying, why did we need to enter it? What were the reasons at the time?
Okay, World War I, usually they said that World War I was fought for, and it's the same thing for World War II, I think, because World War I is you usually have the Wilson 14 points, which the major points are, he said that was to make the world safe for democracy and to the right of self-determination. Usually it's what you hear. But it's a total nonsense and hypocrisy because, but first of all, as libertarian who believes in property right, democracy is not really compatible, I think, with property rights.
Right.
I mean, it used to be that only taxpayer were paying tax. Which I know is that could be seen like
only taxpayers were voting. You mean, yeah?
Yeah. Taxpayers were voting. Sorry, because universal suffrage. I think why did Maxime Bernier didn't even win in his own county last Monday? Because he was the only one proposing to lower the wealth transfer from people to other, which is the main function of the state. I think, like Bastia said, the state is a big fiction with which everybody tries to live at the expense of others. So I think a democracy is not really a good moral thing. But if we accept the ideal of democracy for the First World War, first, the Allies were France and Britain, who were the two biggest colonial empires. There was no democracy for all the people living under colonialism, and there was no right to self-determination to those people at that time, even after.
Right.
And they were allied with Tsarist Russia, who was a huge evil empire. I said evil, not as evil as what would follow. I mean, the communists. Right. But all those big empires were surrounding the tiny countries of Germany and Austria. Germany and Austria didn't have any, they had almost no colonies. So those three big empires, France, Britain, and Russia, surround Germany. Who is the most threatening in that situation?
Right.
If you put yourself at the place of Germany, you're tiny, and all those big empires surrounds you. And it was Russia who mobilized its troops the first.
Right.
I mean, if you, I'm not a big, I don't have big knowledge about military strategy, but I think I understand if Russia mobilized its troop and Germany doesn't do it, they're dead.
Right.
Especially in the situation where they're a tiny country that is surrounded. I mean, if you're Britain in 1914, you're not afraid of Germany. I mean, you're an island and you have, I don't know how, millions of square miles of colonies or commonwealth where you have resource and you have a big fleet. So saying that Germany is the main guilty of the war is for me absurd. I'm not saying Germany had imperialist ambitions, of course,
Right.
which is evil, but saying that the blame should be put on Germany. I think that the blame should be more put on the Allies in the First World War. Of course, the real blame should be put on the statist ideology, because once you accept all the things I said, tax, inflation, conscription, censorship, central planning, and all those things, it's evil. You can have a war when you have those things.
But what were the leaders at the time saying? Why did we need to enter this war? So to protect democracy. But what was specifically the threat that they were saying was present to democracy?
I think they were saying that Germany was going to conquer the world, so they invented propaganda that even after the war, they said that it was false. Well, I think they said that Germany had killed baby and nuns in Belgium with bayonets, and that was obviously not true. But that was an imperialist war in the sense that Germany wanted, because when you have a state, you know, you know, in a free market, if you're if the oh my god, I'm searching the word in English, concurrence, when you what's the name, when there's somebody when other people are selling the same thing than you.
Competitive.
Yeah, competition. Sorry. Yeah. In a free market, when there's competition, you can either be better than them or go bankrupt, which is a thing we accept. But when there is a state, you can use the state against competition.
Right.
And imperialism, I think, is a big part of that.
So we had this war in Europe. We had Britain and France and the Allies, pounding the war drum, saying we need to protect democracy. Germany's going to take over. They're an evil empire. They are bayoneting babies and nuns in Belgium. What if you're just an average Canadian young man, and now North America has decided they're entering the war? What does the average person who signs up to go to war, because you look at Hollywood movies and they depict the time as these heroic young men stepping up. They're signing up for adventure. They're going over there to fight for freedom or something like that. Was that the case? Were people in North America, were soldiers in North America signing up for the adventure? Did they believe they were fighting for a noble cause? What was the mindset from your perspective?
But it was mostly for Canadian, because the United States didn't get into the war until 1917. Right. I think in Canada, but Canada was part of the British Empire, so they were in the nationalist ideology. You like your country and you like this abstract thing that doesn't exist. I know that at the time the war was not popular in Quebec. Right. I can say proudly that my great-grandfather on my mother's side escaped conscription for the First World War, and my grandfather, who is still alive at 93, escaped conscription in 1945 for the Second World War, and I'm totally proud of them. But I know that in Quebec there were riots, and there were even people that got shot for the conscription in the First World War. But again, I don't think that Quebecers at the time opposed war on a philosophical principle. They opposed war because they were not nationalists on the British side. They were probably nationalists on the French-Canadian side, which was just like for me different religions that are not really rational. But
so it was nationalism. It was kind of British nationalism or Commonwealth nationalism, I guess, that motivated Canadians to get over there and get in the fight. What was the reason for the U.S. getting involved in that war? They fought to get out from underneath the rule of the British, and now that here they were going over there to help them out. What was the?
But the war was sold, I think, for two reasons. But for the false reason, the reason that the ruling class used, they said first that the German had sunk the Lusitania, a ship that was carrying some U.S. passenger, and that was full of war stuff like munition and powders, which was apparently illegal at the time. I think many libertarian historians from like Tom Woods or maybe Ralph Raico said, Woodrow Wilson said that we need to go to war so that the U.S. citizens have the right to travel in war zones, which was kind of silly. Also, there was a thing like I don't know if it was a real or a forgery, but apparently there was a telegram that was intercepted by the British where the German told to the Mexican government that if ever the United States was in war with Germany and Mexico would like to enter on the side of Germany, maybe they could get back the land that they lost to the United States in the 19th century. But obviously the Germany had no, during both wars, Germany had, for me, obviously no intention to be at war with the United States. They had enough difficulty in the situation that they were. They didn't need another, and they didn't need that the U.S. enter the war on the side of Britain.
Right.
I think the main reason why the U.S. went to the war was because Wall Street had lended a lot of money to France and Britain. If France and Britain lose the war, or if the war just ends in a stalemate, if Britain and France cannot pay back the money to Wall Street because they're bankrupt after the war, I think there was some pressure from the banks, from Wall Street bankers, to say, hey, let's go to war to be sure that we can force Germany to pay. I think it may sound a little bit like a conspiracy, but I think it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. That makes some sense. So you like World War I seems to be basically kind of a border skirmish in Europe. There, different nations trying to redraw the boundaries. It seems like that we should have just left that alone, let them figure it out. I've heard the argument made that North America, and especially the U.S., entering World War I is what set up the conditions for World War II. And so we had, basically the borders might have been redrawn a little bit had North America not entered World War I. They would have ended kind of in a stalemate, and everyone would have kind of gone home. But the North America entering now made the conditions for World War II, because you had Germany soundly defeated. You had the Treaty of Versailles implemented, which severely punished the German people, and then you had the Weimar Republic and hyperinflation and all these things leading to the perfect conditions for people to demand a strong nationalist leader like Adolf Hitler to take the reins. And of course, everyone demands, when they're fearful and when they feel oppressed, they demand a strong authoritarian to lead them. And Hitler and the Nazis' program of Lebensraum, of hyper-nationalism, right, of extending their nation state, the borders, then threatened everyone around them. And so it's to me that it's a more difficult argument, and this is probably the most controversial subject among libertarians, is World War II. We can make a good argument to say, okay, from a libertarian perspective, World War I, we never should have entered it. But what about World War II? Because didn't we have kind of an obligation to clean up the mess we made by creating Hitler, basically, and creating this hyper-Nazi state?
We'll see that argument. When you try to clean a mess caused by the state by using the state, usually what you do is you cause a bigger mess, and we will see that.
Okay.
So yes, but World War I did not just create the condition for World War II. Well, first, it made the size of the state grow, but it also led to the communist takeover in Russia, which is quite kind of important to mention that.
Yeah.
Okay, but as I said, World War II. Okay, we said the Versailles Treaty that was really unfair to Germany, because you have to understand that the Versailles Treaty claims that Germany was fully responsible for the First World War, which personally I fully disagree. As I said, Germany and Austria were tiny countries in center of Europe, surrounded by three huge empires, and it's Russia who mobilized the first. The idea that Germany is fully responsible for the war is totally, for me, it's false. It makes no sense. I would even say that Britain, France, and Russia had more responsibility than Germany for the First World War.
Gotcha.
So the fact that Hitler wanted to get rid of the Versailles Treaty, I have to agree with him on that. He was right on that. The Nazis were right, and it was not only Hitler that said that. A lot of other people said that. I think there was a French general in 1919 that said that the Versailles Treaty was not peace. It was it was like he said something like, it's like we will have he said that we will have war like in 20 years. It's just a war delayed for 20 years. And I'm searching the word, but he was right, because at the exact time, because 20 years later another war would start. I think even Keynes, the guys from which we have the stupid economic system, John Maynard Keynes, he wrote a book on the Versailles Treaty saying that it would not last, that peace cannot last. It's just the preparation for another war. So also the Versailles Treaty removes some land from Germany and give those land to Poland and Czechoslovakia, where there were German people that wanted to stay with Germany, because at that time the Allies had proclaimed the right of the people to self-determination. But after the First World War, all the people living in the British and French colonies were not given their independence or their so-called self-determination. So the Hitler's movement, I see four major expression of the Nazis. They wanted to get rid of the Versailles Treaty, which I agree, it was totally unfair. And I say even in the statist paradigm, because as a libertarian, I don't like the statist paradigm, but okay, we live in it. If we have state, we're gonna have to accept rule. If something is good to Germany, it has to be good for everyone. You cannot make exception. So the Nazis were, I think, right to want to get rid of the Versailles Treaty. Secondly, the Nazi movement wanted self-determination for the German people. Again, in the paradigm of statism, I have to agree with them. If the British, the Canadian, the French have the right to their self-determination, Why not German? Why not Indian? Why not people in Iraq, in Africa? All those people were denied the right to self-determination, which would cause some anger.
Right.
So, and the two other things that I think the Nazis were, the expression of the National Socialist movement were that, okay, they wanted an ethno-state, which was evil, of course. If it was based on if it was done on the base of private property, I could understand. But yeah, they wanted to have an ethno-state.
Right.
And they had imperial ambition. But again, if it's wrong to Germany to want an empire, which it was evil, it was nothing new to what was happening at the time. I mean, France was an empire. Britain was an empire against the will of many of their subjects. So I don't think that France and Britain had the moral high ground to start a war against Germany. Because if we look at what happened in 1939, okay, Germany had reoccupied the Rhineland, which was German land. They had taken Czechoslovakia, which part of it was Germans. Another part was Czech and Slovak, and that was not, I think, acceptable even under the statist paradigm. But does it deserve a world war for that? I don't think so. They had annexed with Austria. Austria are ethnic German in some way, and after the First World War, the first Austrian parliament voted, I think, at 99% to reunite with Germany, but the Allies forbade it. So, in 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Why did they invade Poland? Because Poland had some German land, and the Polish government refused to give those land back to Germany because the British Empire gave them a guarantee to go to war, which was stupid. So France and Britain declared war to Germany. It's important to remind it. It's France and Britain who declared war the first. So you have the two biggest colonial empires that said to Germany, hey, it's not okay to invade a country, you know? We can do it. We can occupy half, maybe quarter of the world, but don't do it. And for me, that it's a huge hypocrisy, but it doesn't even there. It doesn't even end there, because a few weeks later, Poland was invaded by the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union didn't receive a war declaration from the Allies. On the opposite, the Soviet Union will receive some help, some financial help, some technological help, some military help from the Allies. I mean, it's a nonsense.
Right.
What kind? I mean, what kind of moral is it?
Okay, but the two arguments I hear the most about why we needed to get involved in World War II is the Holocaust. We needed to stop this eradication of the Jews, and two is if we didn't get involved, we'd all be speaking German right now.
Exactly, that's the
Hitler
most common
would be taking over the world. So address those arguments. Why shouldn't we have helped out the genocide that was going on there against the Jews?
Okay. Well, first about the Jews. I'm not a denier, whether it be clear that the German state murdered Jews and it was absolutely evil. But I don't think that the German state who murders Jews is more evil than, let's say, what the British and French and all colonial power did under their colonies. They murdered people there too. And I know that colonialism was not all bad, because there were civilization elements that were brought to those people. But during the war crimes committed by the US and British, like firebombing cities, nuking cities, or even just what was done under the Soviet Union under Stalin, I don't think that it was more evil for the Nazi to murder Jews. That we can make an exception to the non-aggression principle and start a war by saying okay, the Nazis are killing Jews, French, British, US, the Soviet kills people in their own empires, but killing Jews is like more evil. No, I don't think it's more evil. It's
but couldn't you make the justification that another country could have attacked these empire colonialists for their aggression, right? Wouldn't that be protective force in that case? And wouldn't that justify us getting into World War II as well?
Look, I think that the best way to help people, about the Jews, I think that the massive extermination didn't start really until the end of 1941, early 1942. And for me, I see the Holocaust as an act of war, an act of revenge. I think when the Nazis realized that they were going to lose the war, because after Pearl Harbor, after December 1941, when the war became global, when Nazi Germany had failed to beat Russia in Moscow, they realized they were going to lose the war. And for them, I think Hitler said that if all the world is against Germany once again, it's because of the Jews, which I think was silly. It was more of an imperialist entanglement that led to that. But he said, if we're going to lose, the Jews gonna pay. Because before that, the policy of the Nazis was not to kill the Jews. It was to make them immigrate, to get rid of them by forcing them to immigrate. Right. A non-intervention policy at the time from, let's say, the United States, Canada, would have been, okay, Germany is treating the Jews badly. Okay, let's just welcome them as refugees. There was enough land. There was no real welfare state at the time, because I know people can say that we cannot have full open border with a welfare state, which I tend to agree with the argument. But in the 1930s, there was no real welfare state. So instead of going to war, and instead of spreading a war that could have been contained, I think, to only Hitler and Stalin, and why not just welcoming the Jews?
Right.
It would have saved them. It would have saved them. So the argument that World War II for me did not save the Jews. On the opposite, entering in World War II from a Western standpoint just made the Holocaust, or the killing of the Jews, unavoidable. Mm-hmm. So I think the Allies have a huge responsibility in that.
That's an interesting take that I hadn't heard before.
And
Go ahead.
Okay. The other question you asked me, the other arguments that
why are we all speaking German?
Wasn't Germany going to conquer the world? Absolutely no. Germany, logistically, it would have been impossible. Yeah. Germany's ambition was to have an empire in Eastern Europe, which was absolutely evil. But I mean, as I said, if it's bad for Germany to want an empire in Eastern Europe, it's bad for British to have and the French to have their empire too.
Right.
And they don't have the moral high ground to go at war with Germany. And Germany did not want war with the West. After Poland, they made many peace offers that were refused. I mean, the war could have stopped right there, and then it would have gone to Hitler and Stalin together. That would have weakened themselves. It would have been bloody, but there would have been no war in Western Europe. So the Jews in Western Europe would not have been deported. They would have been saved. Germany was not even able to beat Britain, even if I think Germany did not want war with Britain, but they were unable to beat Britain when those two countries were at war together. Germany was not able to cross like the the 30 kilometers of water that separated France with Britain. So the idea that they would have crossed the Atlantic Ocean and conquered North America is so stupid, that, in my opinion, that only brainwashed people can believe that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know that. I think Churchill gave a false map to Roosevelt, claiming that it was the German wanted to conquer South America. Well, that was probably war propaganda, I think.
Right. Right.
And I know that for me, a thing that is clear is that Germany, when you know about the Dunkirk, the Dunkirk battle, the Dunkirk battle.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's clear that they would. It's in the archive, in the conversation between Hitler and his general, where most of his generals are amazed why he ordered the German army to stop. And Hitler would have said that he doesn't want to make a condition where peace is impossible between Germany and the British, because he really didn't. I didn't really think Hitler didn't want a war with the British Empire. So he ordered his army to let the people escape at Dunkirk. Many historians, even historians that are pro-war, would say Hitler made a mistake by ordering his army to stop at Dunkirk, because he could have killed or captured 300,000 to 400,000 British and French soldiers, which would not have been available to fight against him later, because Hitler thought that if he let them go, it would be easier to make peace. But he was wrong. He didn't understand that Churchill was a warmonger, Churchill said the war is not against the Nazis or the Kaiser or whatever. It's against the strength of the German economy. He didn't want a German rival.
Right.
So,
well, one of the things that strikes me as you talk about Germany and the rise, and where all this anti-Semitism kind of came from, the fact that they just wanted to deport Jews at first, and then it makes me wonder. One of the reasons I got into libertarianism or was invited is because I had this epiphany at one point in my life that that I was just completely a product of my culture, that everything I believed about the world had been put there by other people. I hadn't thought my way into any of the positions I held about government, about God and religion, about any of those things. Had I grown up in another part of the world, I'd believe something else. It was very unsettling to think that had I been in Germany in the 30s, that what's to say I wouldn't have just signed up to be a Nazi and been all on board with what was going on here. And now I look at similarities that are going on in culture right now, right? With people that are just byproducts of their culture and they're buying into this propaganda, right? And so I see similar parallels here. And right now there's a growing anti-immigrant sentiment, right? That like our economy is not doing great. We see all these ways in which we're being oppressed. Things aren't trending upwards like they used to. And so it's easy to scapegoat the fact that we have immigrants coming into this country who, by the way, a lot of them are escaping our foreign policies consequences, but that's another point. But we're putting it on them. And right now, all we want to do is close the borders. And some people, there's a growing sentiment of people that actually want to deport immigrants, because if we get rid of these immigrants, they feel that their life will get better, right? They misplace their all their suffering, which should be placed on the government, and they place it on these immigrants. But it seems like it wouldn't be a huge stretch to go from where we're at now to full-on concentration camps where we round these people up, because all it would take would be, maybe it would take someone attacking us or us going to war. But if conditions get sufficiently bad enough, we will simply misplace our trust and we'll go to them. And the other thing that it strikes me is that if you want to create hyper-nationalism and push a country over the edge to where they are engaging in what Germany did, where they're trying to take other lands and they're going too far, right? They, rather than just playing defense and saying this is wrong and flexing your muscles a little bit, they went way above and beyond. It doesn't take that much to push a country over the edge to that and have them do all the things that are all these evil things. So that's the one thing that's striking me about this. How do we prevent ourselves from going down a similar path?
But today we have the chance that we can learn from all those mistakes. Unfortunately, I'm sure that you will take some heat when this conversation we put online. I lost some so-called libertarian friends that called me a Nazi sympathizer. No, I'm not a Nazi sympathizer. I sympathize with the property right and non-aggression and the non-aggression principle, which are my core value. I cannot force someone else to go die in a war that will kill many more innocents and that will have huge unintended consequence. As I said, for me, the Holocaust is an unintended consequence of going into World War II. Like the fact that after World War II, what did World War II achieve? But it led to the spread of communism because, France and Britain went to war to save Poland. But after the war, Poland wasn't saved. It was given to Stalin as half of Europe. Communism spread to half of Europe for Stalin. Mao was able to gain power in China, and you probably know that the Mao Zedong regime is probably the most bloody in the 20th century. I think there are some estimates that say that it could have been up to 75 million deaths in Mao's China. Right. And, Mao was helped by the United States during the Second World War against Japan, the same way that the guy in Korea was helped against Japan. The Ho Chi Minh in Indochina was helped by the West during the Second World War. But all those countries after the Second World War went to communism. And you know how communism is bloody, how it destroys lives at a scale that is unimaginable.
Yeah.
So World War II grew the size of the state. The real winner of World War II is the statist ideology, communism in half of the world, and in the West it was the welfare state, the Keynesian management of the economy, and the military-industrial complex that are the winners of this war. You wonder what is what we call postmodernism and cultural Marxism. That is a problem, I think, today. You understand those things?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but where do they come from? Well, they probably have many sources, but I think World War II is. If you want to destroy cultural Marxism and postmodernism, you have to debunk the myth of World War II. Postmodernism are always calling people racist, Nazi, sexist, homophobic, blah, 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 blah. And people are afraid of being called those names because they have the idea that being racist is the worst thing you can be. And let's be clear, I'm not promoting racism, but morally, the libertarian morals are based on private property. When you have a private property, your body, your house, your land, you have the right to discriminate. You have the right to not associate. And it's what the cultural Marxists and the left hates, that we defend the right to not associate with what we don't like. But the things with World War II is that most people think, first they think that the evils of World War II, like what was done by the Nazi, was done because of racism. Of course, racism and anti-Semitism has its role in that, but fundamentally, why the Nazis were able to do all that evil? Because of the state. It's the state that is fundamentally the problem, and it's everywhere. And the danger you're afraid that could happen with all the problems we have today, again, is the state.
Yeah.
Because everybody is afraid that other group will take control of the state and impose on them harsh things.
Right.
I mean, the Nazis were ethnocentric, and many Jews are ethnocentric too. So you were in Germany at that time. I mean, I could understand that the many group of people were hating themselves, but again, what's the problem? It's the state.
Yeah,
If we were in a world where you fundamentally respect private property, where Jews can do things among themselves and other people can not associate with them if they want. If the Nazi want to have their enclosure to do their stuff on the base of private property, they can do it. People can discriminate against them and not associate with them. Same thing today. If it would be that, you could have the Muslim in their corner, the left in their corner, but when you have a huge state, it's terrifying.
Yeah, and I think people need to appreciate the degree to which racism is driven by the state, right? As the state uses its power to divide people and separate them into different categories, and the left is really good at this, because that's all you hear on the left is they categorize people based on their immutable characteristics and then say we have to treat these people different than these people, and they look at those people maybe as children and they need our help because, you know, with Justin Trudeau, for example, I'm a white male, therefore I need to look after these people who are children, right? They need my parentage. And so they look at him like that. And then of course he says we have to take money from this group of privileged people, those that have privilege, and send it to those who have no privilege and no agency and no ability to help themselves. And I mean, that's a form of racism right there. It's the racism of the left. Yeah. But then, of course, that animates the racism on the right, which says, well, now those people they don't look at Justin Trudeau and his policies or the state's policies of divide and conquer. They look at those people and say, well, those people are getting all my money. Why are those people getting my money? They're the enemy, right? And so suddenly racial animosity starts to creep in and rise up. And
exactly.
And so this is exactly what happened, I suspect, in Germany to some degree, is you know all this this oppression caused by the state and dividing people and pointing at, well, of course you're going to start to see racism being fomented. And so I'm very interested in keeping Canada and keeping North America from going down that road. Western civilization is built on these principles. I think the degree to which Western civilization works is the degree to which we have liberty in the spaces in between where the state has its tentacles, and that those spaces are getting choked off more and more, and it's going to lead to violent conflict. And so, listen, we're coming up on an hour. I appreciate you coming on, Manuel, and talking about these things. These are difficult subjects. Yes. You raised a lot of points I hadn't heard or thought of before about World War II. I still am mulling them over. I think you make a lot of good points. I'm not totally convinced yet whether it was a good idea or not to be in World War II, but you definitely have given me food for thought, and I think our listeners food for thought. So thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
Can I just give a few references?
Yeah,
because
sure.
People may not want to believe everything I said. Right. Me, I base myself mostly on the best revisionist historian, I think, comes from the Mises Institute.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, Manuel, why don't you offline send me the links and I'll put them down below in the show notes, and people can click on the links and they can read all these.
Sure.
And learn more about your perspective and how that relates. Awesome.
Thank you very much, Tim. I really appreciate this conversation.
No problem. Thank you very much.